Isaac to be the son of promise. Is my head on straight yet? Am I making a lot of mistakes? Let me try again.
I think you can.
Arabs consider Ishmael to be the son of promise. Jews and Christians consider Isaac to be the son of promise. Thank you, Bub. Here's our theme verse, Romans 15:4. Everything that was written in the past, according to Paul, what was written in the past? The Old Testament was written to teach us. That's why we study it. So that through the endurance taught in the Scriptures and the encouragement they provide, we might have what? Hope. Because we see through the Old Testament how God keeps His covenants and keeps His word. So, last week we saw how God ratified the covenant with the cutting ceremony or the blood covenant. And today we're looking at Genesis 16. And the main characters in Genesis 16 are Abram. He's not yet Abraham. In fact, it's going to be about 15 more years before he's called Abraham. Sarai, Abram's barren wife. And we know that this is the major problem in the whole first 25 chapters of Genesis is Abram's wife can't have a baby. Hagar is the third character that we will be studying. She was Sarai's young Egyptian slave, or perhaps her handmaiden. Sometimes those words are used interchangeably, but she did come from Egypt, and probably when they were there in Egypt, when Abram and Sarai were in Egypt, they brought her back with them. And then finally, we're going to meet Ishmael, Abram's son, by Hagar, and Hagar is not his wife. So, Abram is now 85 years old in chapter 16, and Sarai is 10 years younger, so she would be 75 years old. I'm not even that old yet, and she's still wanting to have a baby. They make a painful detour, and I was reading about Vince Havner, a scholar, and he said that the detour is always more difficult than the main road. And we know that, don't we? And so these people, Sarai and Abram, take a painful detour, and that's verses, we're going to read verses 1 through 6 on page 12. Ready? Now Sarai, this is number 1, letter A on page 12. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, so he didn't have an heir. Right? So he told God, I'm going to make my servant my heir. And God said, no, Eliezer is not going to be your heir. You will have a son. And that was in chapter 15. But she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So, I love this because this is really a sad, sad story. So she said to her husband Abram, the Lord has kept me from having children. So I want you to go sleep with my slave. So she is taking things into her own hands here, isn't she? Perhaps I can build a family through her. Because in her mind, the baby by her handmaiden to her husband would be her child, right? So she would build her family through her. So Abram agreed to what Sarai said. So after Abram had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarai took his wife, her Egyptian slave Hagar, and gave her to her husband to be his wife. So we know that he was 75 when he went into Canaan. So now it's 10 years later, so he's 85. He slept with Hagar, and she conceived. When she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. Why would that be? Why would she begin to despise her mistress? Jealousy. Fear. Right? Fear. Competition. When you're in competition, so with people, sometimes you don't like them. So she now is going to despise her mistress. How is her mistress going to respond? Just like I would. Let's see what she does. Sarai said to Abram, her husband, "You are responsible for the wrong I am suffering." Sounds like Adam and Eve, doesn't it? You're responsible for the wrong I'm suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and now she knows she's pregnant, and she despises me. May the Lord judge between me and you. And I haven't really studied what that line means, but I'm thinking probably it's saying, you know, God is going to be the judge here of what's happened, and it's your fault. He'll judge you. And Abram said, "Your slave is in your hands. Do with her whatever you think best." And this is the first step to where we're beginning to see a root of bitterness begin to grow between two groups of people, because we're going to see now that this bitterness, the hate that these women have for each other, is going to grow and produce terrible fruit. And he says, "Do whatever you think best." So Sarah mistreated Hagar. Makes so much sense, doesn't it? Makes so much sense, and it's just so sad. I really can imagine a movie on this, can't you? And how she mistreated her slave. So Hagar fled from Sarai. So letter A on your paper, on number 1, capital A in the middle, little a. Whom had God identified as the father of the promised heir? Who was to be the father? Abram. That's right. God said, "You will have an heir." So letter B, when God gave this promise to Abram in chapter 15, who did he identify as the mother? No one. He said, "Abram, you will have a son, your own flesh and blood son." But he didn't identify Sarai as to be the wife. So he didn't identify anyone as the mother. The answer is no one. But what would logic indicate to us? Who would it be? Sarai. That's right. So logic would indicate that it would be Sarai, and she supposed that as well. Letter C. Does this act of Sarah and Abram have God's approval?
No.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't have God's approval at all. So when people say to me, well, Abram had 2 wives, or Jacob had 4 wives, or 2 wives, David had a lot of wives, so it must be okay. Is that right? No. Here's how we answer that statement. It's in the Bible because it's an historical event. It's not that it's under God's approval. He doesn't condone this behavior, but it is an act in the historical account. So we read it as that, as opposed to God giving His approval of these events. So it does not have God's approval, but it's recorded as an event of what? History. That's right, history. All right. So I guess I should have put that all up there, shouldn't I? Does this act have God's approval? No. But it's recorded as an event in Abram's history. So why, I don't know that I have, why did Sarai mistreat Hagar? Do what, Terry?
I was just clearing my throat, but because I got the impression that Hagar was acting superior to her because she got pregnant, Sarai did not.
So she started hating her mistress, and then Sarai then mistreats her. She was threatened, wasn't she? What did you say,
Jealousy.
Dorothy? Jealousy again? She was feeling threatened. Jealousy.
You can have a baby, I hate you.
That's right.
I mean, it's normal in our world today.
Yes, it is. This is very normal behavior. I think she was threatened by her because that's how women received a self-esteem was by the fact that they had children, particularly boys. And she had no children at all. So she is threatened, she was jealous, all kinds of things. Now let's look at verses 7 through 11. Oh yeah, and I put mistrust here. Verses 7 through 11. This is a beautiful part of the passage because we have this young woman, a beautiful young woman, out now being mistreated by her servant and by her mistress, and we see God showing this young woman grace and mercy. Let's look at verses 7 through 11 on number 2 on page 12. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert, so she ran away. Did we already read that she ran away? She ran away, and she's near a body of water in the desert, and it was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. Now, in the scriptures, you will read about this road to Shur, S-H-U-R. I'm going to do a study someday on all the different roads in the scriptures. The Damascus road and the road to, where were the disciples going after the resurrection? They were going to somewhere. And then the Jericho road, all kinds of roads. This road to Shur is a very interesting road. What?
Emmaus.
The road to Emmaus. Thank you. That's my favorite story in the book of Luke. The wilderness of Shur, it's in the wilderness, is in the Sinai Peninsula. So if you look at your map, at the bottom, you will see the desert of Shur. And they were in Hebron, and she went south and west down to the desert of Shur, and that was called the road to Shur. And look where it's located, right in the Sinai Peninsula. Okay? What do we know about the Sinai Peninsula on this map? What do we know about that peninsula? John?
It's the wilderness. It's where Israel spent 40 years.
What?
Where Israel spent 40 years.
Yeah, about 500 years later, the Israelites spent 40 years there wandering in the wilderness. What else happened in the Mount Sinai, in the Sinai Peninsula?
That's where Moses went.
That's where Moses went up on the top of Mount Sinai, the very bottom of the peninsula, where he got the 10 Commandments. This is where they got the law. All right? So, here's what I want you to know. It's in the Sinai Peninsula. Whenever you read about Hagar after this story, you will read about her in the book of Romans and in the book of Galatians, and you'll read about Hagar. She always represents the law. And Sarah, the mother-to-be of the son of promise, will be the mother of salvation. But Hagar will always be joined with the law. The road to Shur always represents bondage and law. So when Moses was, that's where Mount Sinai is located, and when Moses was there 450 years later, perhaps, maybe closer to 500 years later, and he went up on Mount Sinai and he received all the laws of God, there were at least 613 of them in the books of law. 613 laws that Moses received from God and gave to the people. 613 of them. By the time Jesus came along, they had assigned all kinds of laws for the Israelites so that they could obey those laws. So you could obey the law that you shall have no other gods before God. I forgot about 70 or 80 laws right there that they built around that first commandment so that they wouldn't break it. So you couldn't sweep your floors. Because if you sweep your floors at that time, at Jesus' time, then it was like you were tilling the soil, which was work. So you couldn't do that. And you just had, there's so many different things you could and could not do to not only worship, to have any other gods, but also to keep the Sabbath day holy. That was one of the biggest commands that they tried to follow. And when they made all these other commandments and laws around each one of those 10 laws, they called that building a fence. The Pharisees called it building a fence around the law. So you have the main law here, and they build a fence, and you can't break this law, so therefore you can't break the major law. And it was Jesus called that, what did he say to the Pharisees about all those laws that he put on the people? He said, you have put so much burden, so many burdens on God's people that they can barely walk. And that was in the New Testament. Well, here, Moses got 613 commandments. And so Hagar represents bondage and law, bondage to the law. So you'll read about that in the book of Romans. We're not going to have time to do that today, but someday I will teach you about what the New Testament says about Hagar. Okay? Any questions on what I just gave you? It's called building a fence. The Pharisees built fences around the laws to keep them from breaking them. It put the people under great bondage. So the wilderness of Shur, the road to Shur, and Hagar always represent what? Bondage and the law. That's right. And here it is on the big map. Okay, and very much of a desert. All right, so now we're on verse 8 on page 12. Are you there?
For an example, the law to keep the Sabbath day, they added all these laws to say, so you can't cook on the Sabbath, you can't sweep your floors, you can't walk further than so many miles. So they created all of these nonsense laws to create a fence so that they wouldn't.
So they wouldn't break the original commandment. Right. That's right. Wouldn't it be terrible? I mean, that's what Paul was talking about throughout the New Testament, how we are free from the law. We don't have to live under that bondage anymore. And the Jews, the believers, loved that. Now let's look at verse 8. And yeah.
What happened if they did break one of those laws?
What?
What happened if they did break one of those small laws?
I don't know. The fence laws?
Yeah.
I think, I don't think most of the Jews did, because they were so under the law and under so much oppression by the religious leaders. So,
If they broke too many of the laws, my understanding was they could get kicked out of the synagogue.
yeah, if they didn't follow, if they were not going to believe it, they'd get kicked out of the synagogue.
We have the blind man that Jesus healed, and they threatened him, and they ended up kicking him out of the synagogue because he wouldn't recant Christ.
Yeah.
And he kind of told them off. But, so we know that some of that stuff did happen. So.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sounds like North Korea, doesn't it?
Do what? Yeah, it does.
North Korea.
So verse 8. So this angel said to her, he said, where have you come from and where are you going? She said, I'm running away from my mistress. Verse 8. Where have you come from? Where are you going? I'm running away from my mistress Sarai. And she answered that. And I'm running away from my mistress. Okay. Then the angel of the Lord told her, go back to your mistress. That would be hard, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Go back to your mistress and submit to her. Now that would be hard, wouldn't it, girls? To go back to someone who mistreats you, that's jealous of you, that's threatened by you, that mistreats you, and you go back and submit to her. But he gives her a promise. He added some other things. He said, I will increase your descendants. How many children did she have? None yet. She's just pregnant. Yeah. And he said, but I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count. So this is how God is going to fulfill to Abraham other descendants, too numerous to count, more than the dust of the earth. The angel of the Lord said to her, you are now pregnant, and you will give birth to a son, and you shall name him Ishmael. That means in the Hebrew, God hears. God hears. That's a pretty nice name, isn't it? Isn't Ishmael the name in the novel with the white whale?
Yep.
What was that called?
Call me Ishmael.
What?
Moby Dick.
Moby Dick. Yeah.
What?
Moby Dick.
Moby Dick. And one of the men in there was Ishmael. God hears. The Lord has heard of your misery. So that's page 12A, number 2. Any questions on that? Okay, let's do what?
If you look at that map, Hagar was headed home, back to Egypt.
Say that again, Wilma.
If you look at the map,
Uh-huh.
Hagar was headed home, back to Egypt.
Yeah, she was. She was heading home. Very good point. Very good point. Heading back home to Egypt. Yeah. All right. Page 13. Now let's look at number 3. Here's the description of her son that the angel gives her. And when we read it, we think, oh my gosh, because it sounds like an insult. Look at that. He will be a wild donkey of a man. Well, we know what we call people who are donkeys in our society. That is not what this is here. The donkey in their culture was the best of the wild animals. Okay? But it said he will be a donkey of a man. It was the favorite of the wild beasts of the desert. When they went hunting, it was their preferred prey. And Ishmael would be like that. He would be a wild donkey. So he's going to be a favored man, an aristocrat of these people. Now look at letter C. Let's see. Well, let's do those. Ishmael and his descendants would live the independent lifestyle of a wild donkey. So how does a wild animal live? That we can say the Arabs live that way. They're free, don't they? In fact, they roam throughout the desert. They live in beautiful, beautiful, rich people live in beautiful, beautiful tents and have beautiful carpets. And so they're free and they live in a life of nobility. And they have an existence in the desert. So let's look at that on page 13, number 3. He will be a wild what?
Donkey.
Donkey of a man. The donkey was the aristocrat of the wild beasts, the preferred prey of hunters. And this prophecy is a reference to how Ishmael's descendants would emulate or copy or practice the lifestyle of the wild what? Donkey. They would emulate the lifestyle of a donkey. They would be free and noble in their existence in the desert. So when you, particularly in the early 1900s, they really did live a noble existence in the desert. It's not so much that now, I don't think. All right, let's look at verse 12, verse number 4. He said he will be a wild donkey of a man. Furthermore, his hand will be against everyone. And when we think about the Arabs in history, they are against everyone. They say, and I don't know, I've not met any of them, but you couldn't ever really trust what they had to say because that was one way they survived. Is that no matter what they said, you can count on it not being the truth, or their covenants and their contracts not necessarily true.
They were deceptive.
What?
They were deceptive.
Yeah, very deceptive. So their hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. Isn't this an interesting prophecy that God gives of these people? And he will live in hostility toward all his brothers. Now, who would be the brothers of Ishmael?
The Jews.
The Jews. J.W.?
The reason why they lie is that's in their holy war thing.
Uh-huh.
Well, it's in the Quran.
Well, it's in the Quran, yeah, and that's part of their holy war, is if they lie to get what they want. That's in the Quran part.
Well, that would cause people to be hostile toward them, wouldn't it? And it would build their hostility. And hostility toward the brothers. His brothers would be the descendants of whom? The baby not yet born, Isaac. That's right. The Jews eventually. So Ishmael and his descendants will live an independent lifestyle. That's letter A. And number 4. They'll live an independent lifestyle. They've always resisted foreign rule over their lands. To this day, they're fighting to keep their land. that they assume is theirs. So what does this say? Letter A. This also refers to the independent lifestyle of Ishmael and his descendants. And they have always resisted foreign domination and foreign rule. And that is one reason why there is so much trouble today in Israel, because when the Jews came back there in 1948 and the United Nations voted to make them an independent nation, there were people living there. And they'd been living there for centuries. And they said, this is our land. We've lived here for centuries. And yet the United Nations had said it would belong to the Jews. And a war started the very next day. And it hasn't really ceased, because they do not want anyone dominating their land. Let's see what she did, what Hagar did. Verses 13 through 16, number 5. She gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. You are the God who sees me. So that's what she is naming this angel or God who has just spoken to her. For she said, I have now seen the one who sees me. I have now seen the one who sees me. And that, according to the scriptures, is why the place where she was, it said that she had stopped by a body of water, and it was called that. Let me see if I can say that. I practice that. Bir Lahai Roy. That's not the way, that's the way you say it in English. Is that right? Good enough? Yep. Okay. And it means the one who sees me. It is still there between Kadesh and Bered. Now let me ask you a question. When Moses says it's still there, this well, it's still there to this day, what does that mean? Does that mean you could go there today and look for it?
Well, the living one who watches over me.
Who's talking to me? What'd you say, Jack?
It says that the well of the living one who watches over me.
Right. But then it said that well is still there today.
Yes.
Well, it's not necessarily still there today. It was still there the day that Moses wrote this. All right? That's how you have to read that. Because you may find it and you may not. It's the one who sees me. What did you say?
Between Kadesh and Bered.
Okay. So, verse 15. Still there between Kadesh and Bered. So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram gave the name Ishmael, meaning what? Meaning what? What does Ishmael mean? God hears, to the son she had born. And Abraham was 86 years old when Hagar bore him Ishmael. So they had been in Canaan for 10 years. And then Hagar became pregnant, and by the time he was born, Abram was 86 years old. Don't you know that he was excited to have a baby boy? I think he was. He loved that boy. The scriptures tell us that he really loved that boy. Now Sarai had a problem with him, but Abram loved him. Now look at number 6 on your notes. Abram was how old when Hagar bore him? 86. Now I think it'd be fun to listen to this chapter read, don't you think? So open your Bibles to chapter 16 of Genesis and follow along as we read this. Because what are you doing, Terry? You throwing pencils at the teacher?
Yes.
Okay, here we go. Are you ready? Because it's beautifully read. But open your Bibles to Genesis 16. Here we go. Honey, will you turn it up, please, sir? And John, why don't you Jason, turn off some lights for us so we can, because this has got some pictures in it. Now, these are old classic paintings that the author who's reading this has copied for us. So some of the women are a little undressed. All right. So here we go.
Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So she said to Abram, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go, sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her." Abram agreed to what Sarai said. So after Abram had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarai his wife took her Egyptian slave Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife. He slept with Hagar, and she conceived. When she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. Then Sarai said to Abram, "You are responsible for the wrong I am suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and now that she knows she is pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me." "Your slave is in your hands," Abram said. "Do with her whatever you think best." Then Sarai mistreated Hagar, so she fled from her. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. And he said, "Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from, and where are you going?"
Try to be still.
"I'm running away from my mistress Sarai," she answered. Then the angel of the Lord told her, "Go back to your mistress and submit to her." The angel added, "I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count." The angel of the Lord also said to her, "You are now pregnant, and you will give birth to a son. You shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery. He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and he will live in hostility toward all his brothers." She gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her, "You are the God who sees me," for she said, "I have now seen the one who sees me." That is why the well was called Bir Lahai-Roi. It is still there, between Kadesh and Bered. So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram gave the name Ishmael to the son she had born. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore him Ishmael.
Okay. I love listening to that, don't you? So here's some facts that we need to remember about Ishmael. Ishmael, Genesis 16, we meet his parents. All right, this is letter A on letter B. Let's see, capital B, number 1, Genesis 16. Letter A, his parents. He was the son of whom? Abram. By what woman? Hagar, that's right. This Egyptian slave of Sarai. What does Ishmael's name mean? God hears. And it's a monument of God's faithfulness and care to his mother Hagar. And that's why he is named Ishmael. Letter C, Ishmael's father was whom? Abram. How old was he when Ishmael was born? 86, that's right. 86. All right. Okay. Now then, if you would look at chapter 17, verse 1. Now, he's 86 when the baby was born. Look at chapter 1. How many years have passed?
14.
Chapter 17, verse 1. 13 years have passed between those two chapters now. Between the period of the last period of verse 15 and the first word of the chapter 17, verse 1, 13 years have passed. And this is when God calls Abram to do for the sign of the covenant. Last week we looked at how they ratified the covenant. What's the sign of the covenant? We don't have time to do that this lesson, but I just want you to know this is where the sign of the covenant, circumcision, is, and we'll study that. So how old was Ishmael at this time? 13. And so if you'll look at verse 23 of chapter 17, on that very day, Abraham took his son Ishmael and all of those born in his household, every male in his household, and circumcised them as God had told him. Abraham was 99 years old when he was circumcised. Whoa. And his son Ishmael was 13. So that's real important to know. And then we go on over to look at chapters 18 and 19. That's the account of Sodom and Gomorrah. So Abraham is close to 100 now when he goes into, when he bargains with God to save Lot. And so then we'd go on over to chapter 20 and we see Abraham and Abimelech, and we'll study that someday. Chapter 21 is the birth of Isaac. So, he is 100 years old on chapter 21. We're not going to study the birth of Isaac today to learn about the birth of Isaac, except for looking at where Ishmael was involved in this account. Abraham is 100 years old. Sarah, now called Sarah, is 90. And she has her baby, her son that God had promised them 25 years ago.
That's a long wait.
That's a long, long wait. But the scriptures tell us that Abraham never staggered at the promise of God in unbelief. Isn't that beautiful? But he was confident. He knew that what God had promised, he would perform. And so now the baby is born. Now we have a 13-year-old boy in the family. Jason, what's a 13-year-old boy like?
Pain in the behind.
What?
They're a pain in the behind.
A pain in the behind. What do they do? Well, you have one too, John. What are they like? Are they mouthy?
They can be.
They can be.
Mine pushed my buttons.
Here's what?
Pushed my buttons.
They push buttons. They know how to push buttons. You have a few of them, don't you? How would you describe your 13-year-old boys? I never had one. God did not want me to have one.
Rebellious.
Rebellious? You know why they're rebellious, don't you? How old is yours? Is he 13 yet?
18.
18?
Yeah.
Oh, so he's outgrown it all now, right?
Yeah.
Finally made it. You know, the reason that they are like that, I learned this after our daughter was raised. It was too late for me to understand this, but that's when they're really learning how to, you can hold on to this, okay, Monica. They're really learning how to become adults. And so they're practicing. They are practicing becoming independent adults. And their practice is pretty painful to all of us. Well, here in this home where Abraham and Sarah live, they have a 13-year-old boy, Ishmael, and he is Abraham's son by another woman. And now Sarah has finally, at age 90, had her baby. What do you think's going to happen now? Has the family dynamics gotten even more dramatic? Yeah, they're going to even get more dramatic. All right, so let's read this on page Genesis 21, and this is number 2, page 13. See where I say 14 years later? I think we should start, well, that's okay. We'll just leave it there, or put 13 if you want to. But this is where the root of bitterness actually is planted. Ishmael was 14 when Isaac was born. All right? He's 14. Or was he 13? Where did I read that? Okay, the birth of, yeah, he's probably 13 or 14, somewhere in there. So, the son of promise, that's Isaac, was born to Abraham and Sarah. And we're going to study that at another time. So let's read verses 1 to 5. Do I have it up there? Do I not have it up there? Okay, I'm going to read it to you. Okay, I will. It is up there. So Sarah, they say in Jewish tradition, now here we have this 13 or 14-year-old boy, and he was an archer according to the scriptures, bow and arrow guy. And according to Jewish tradition, Ishmael was shooting arrows at the little bitty boy, and it made Sarah mad. Wouldn't you think so? But that's what tradition is. Let's read this. The child Isaac grew and was weaned. Now, in that day and time, do you know how old a baby was when he was weaned? About 3 years old when he was weaned. So now we have Ishmael being about 17. Even harder to get along with because he's even bigger, isn't he? So we have Isaac was weaned, and Abraham held a great feast, but Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abraham, who was now 17 years old, was mocking her baby. I can see it now, and I can see Sarah now too, can't you? Come on, moms, can you see it? And so she says to her husband, fix this. And we know what she meant. She said to Abraham, get rid of her. Get rid of that slave woman and her son. This was Abraham's son. And now we're getting rid of him. So this is the second time that they have been sent out into the desert, pretty much. And for she said, that woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac.
But wasn't Abram attached to him?
Yes, he was. The scriptures tell us Abraham loved his son. Yes, and he would, of course. And she said, but he will not share in the inheritance with my son Isaac. So the matter distressed Abraham greatly because it concerned his son. You see, he did love his son. And he's going to have to get rid of him and rid of Hagar. But God said to Abraham, don't be so distressed about the boy and your slave woman. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you. Now, we can take that verse out of context if you want to, girls, and just say the Bible says that men are to listen and do what their wives tell them. We could take it right out of there, couldn't we? All right. You do it now, I know, honey. He says, listen to whatever Sarah tells you because it's through Isaac that your offspring will be counted. It's through Isaac. I will make the son, this is God speaking to Abraham, I will make the son of the slave into a nation also. This is the Arab nation, because he is your offspring. Early the next morning, Abraham took some food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. And he set them on her shoulders and sent her off with the boy. Now, what is going to make this boy feel like when his dad sends him away like that into the desert with a little bit of water and a little bit of food? What's he going to feel like? Total rejection. And he was rejected, wasn't he? And he sent her off with the boy. She went on her way and wandered in the desert of Beersheba, which is south as well, not over the Sinai, but a little bit further east. And when the water in the skin was gone, she put the boy under one of the bushes. Then she went off and sat down about a bow shot away, however far you can shoot a bow. Because she, what, honey?
Shoot an arrow.
Within it.
With a bow.
You don't shoot a bow.
Says you do. Okay, a bow shot. Yeah, however far you can shoot an arrow with a bow. I'm a sportsman. For she thought, I cannot watch the boy die. Can you not feel for this woman and her boy? He's rejected. Yes, Jason?
I have questions with this passage. Because this boy was 17.
Yeah.
He should have been strong and healthy.
I've been worried about that.
And his mom, Abraham puts all the stuff on his mom to carry because she's the slave. Ishmael's not a slave.
Right. That's a good point.
She's the one carrying the food and carrying the water, and so when the water and food is used up,
He lays down.
He can't make it. He's 17 for crying out.
Well, you help me with that, because I've been thinking about that, because we know he's at least 16 or 17. He should be taking care of his mom a little better, shouldn't he have? What, Monica? Okay. What, Jackie?
To me, he didn't have respect for his mother.
Maybe not. And he wasn't ever taught respect for her by Sarah, probably.
She was a slave, but Ishmael was not a slave.
That's what Jason's saying. He's not a slave. So he could lie down under the rock and die of thirst. Well, anyway, good points. I like what you said. He should have been a man by then.
In that culture, he would have been.
Well, I would have thought so. So I don't understand it. That's just what, yeah.
I have a theory because I see all the screaming, yelling, and fighting going on for days while this is happening, including.
It just was not an easy event, was it?
Maybe the son just got mad and said, "I'm not going any further."
Well, maybe he's depressed because his daddy has thrown him out.
Yeah.
And he's not even getting an inheritance.
Well, they didn't quietly leave. There had to be a lot of tears and yelling and
Yeah,
all that.
probably was. It wasn't a happy day, was it? It was very dramatic, full of drama. Good points. We'll fill that in when we write the movie, all right? Okay. I cannot watch the boy die. And that's what you're saying, Jason. Why is he going to die at 17? So she sat there and she began to sob. And that's page 14. Okay, so now let's turn over to page 14 and we'll finish that up. God heard the boy crying. Now maybe he wasn't crying. You know, when we see pictures of this, we see a little boy, don't we? Most pictures show this as a little boy right about here on at the mom's tummy level, and she's holding him. So, yes, Suzette?
Those 17, 18-year-old boys, they're not little.
No, they're not. They're really big, aren't they? So this is it's really interesting what the pictures, the art tells us. Kirk?
Weren't people still living 200 years? So at 17, maybe you were really only the size of a 7-year-old?
Good point. Maybe they weren't. Maybe so. He just said, they didn't live a whole lot longer, so maybe they weren't at his full maturation.
To what God said, to the type of man God said he was going to be.
That he's going to be a wild guy. So he hadn't turned into a wild man yet, has he?
Or has he?
I have 2 boys, and I take that for them. They were.
Okay, you're going to have to talk really. You know what? I've left my hearing aids home. I can't hear. Sorry.
I have 2 boys, and I always take that for them because, I was older when I had them. Maybe this kid was so distraught at what his father had done that he really didn't have any physical strength left.
I think that's really quite possible because he was the only child for 14 years. And now he's been displaced and disinherited. He's going to be depressed, isn't he? Maybe he would lie down and die. Prefer to lie down and die. Do what?
No matter what. Mamas want to take care of their kids no matter how old they are.
That's right. And so we see Hagar there distraught. It's really interesting. Yes, Jason, I love this.
That we see here, which is kind of interesting.
Will you start all over again?
Another thing that we see here that's kind of interesting is she's crying and God hears him crying. Now he is Abraham's son. Abraham is the one that he's made a promise to. Earlier, when he comes to Sarah, or when he comes to Hagar, he calls her Sarah's servant. Sarah is part of the promise. So it's as if he's, even when he talks to them, he's reminding even them the promise is to Sarah and Abraham.
Yes.
I'm only talking to you because you're Sarah's handmaid. I'm listening to this boy because this is Abraham's son. And I made a promise to him.
Right. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, because this is not the one whom God is going to choose to be the son of promise. Yeah. Well, good points. Okay, page 14. God heard the boy crying, as Jason said, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, so he is treating her pretty nicely, isn't he? Calling from heaven, and he says, "What's the matter, Hagar?" Oh, don't you know he said that sweetly to her? How do you think he said it? "What's the matter, Hagar? Don't be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there." And you see this picture, I don't know. Hey, Jason, can you turn the lights off? Because I'm thinking this picture is what misleads us in our mind about the boy. Because look at the boy is way over under this rock. Right here. He's got a beard. I don't know that he does. Or a mustache. So he looks like a pretty big kid here. Okay, thank you guys. All righty. Lift the boy up. Oh, look at this. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand. I am confused because you guys have really confused me.
Lift him up by the hand. Yeah.
"For I will make him into a great nation." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. She went and filled the skin with water, not Ishmael, but Hagar, filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. So we could just do all kinds of things with this story. So I'm telling us ourselves, and just as Jason said, God did not forget Ishmael. God, look at verse 20 in your Bible. This is number 3. God did not forget Ishmael. Chapter 21, verse 20, the first part says that God was with the boy, Ishmael, as he grew up. So God was with him. So maybe at that time they were very young at age 16 and 17. Verse 20, letter B, the second part of verse 20. Ishmael lived in the desert of Paran, and you can see it on your map. See the wilderness of Paran, and you can see that it's in the Sinai Peninsula. And go way down south in the Sinai Peninsula, and you see Mount Sinai. So that's where the Israelites were when Moses received the law. So he lived in the desert of Paran, and he became an archer. And I think that's where the Jewish tradition comes from, that he was shooting arrows at his baby brother. And verse 21, while he was living in the desert of Paran, his mother got a wife for him from Egypt, which I think is very interesting. Now then, we're going to see how God will fulfill these promises to Ishmael and to Abraham.
So on this 1:18, it says the boy was taken by hand who will make him a great nation. He became
God is going to list his 12 sons one time, and we never read about them again. Why? Because they are not in the line of the son of promise. But when we read about Jacob and his 12 sons, the Bible is just full of their history, isn't it? Because they are in the line of the promised Messiah. So God wants us to know about all of these people, but he doesn't elaborate on anybody except Isaac's line, because he is the son of promise. So let's look at chapter 25, verse 12. And maybe I'll read these and maybe I won't. Oh yeah, let's try it. This is verse 12. This is the account of Abraham's son Ishmael, whom Sarah's maidservant Hagar the Egyptian bore to Abraham. He's going to have 12 sons. They will grow into tribes. These are the names of the sons of Ishmael, listed in the order of their birth. Nebaioth, the firstborn of Ishmael, Kedar, Adbeel, Midsam, Mishma, Duma, Massa, Hadad, Tema, Jeter, Naphish, and Kedemah. We don't ever hear these names repeated in the Bible, do we?
No.
Why? What?
I've heard of Adbeer.
Thank you, darling. I don't think he's even in here. I think you misheard me. All right. We don't hear about these sons again because they are not in the line of the Messiah. So look what else it says. These were the sons of Ishmael. These are the names of the 12 tribal rulers according to their settlements and camps. So they lived throughout that area and had families and became the founder of tribes. So Arabs consider Ishmael the son of promise, not Isaac. Here are the names of the sons. We never see his line mentioned again, which I find so interesting. We never see them again. The scriptures do not follow his line. So we never hear about them again. Because the scriptures, when it follows the line of people, it only follows the chosen line, the line of Isaac, the messianic line. So, and then it says that Ishmael, verse 17, all the rest of what they tell us is that he lived 137 years. He breathed his last and died, and he was gathered to his people. So 137, so he lived about 120 more years, didn't he, after that incident in the desert. So I guess he had time to grow up. His descendants settled in the area from Havilah to Shur, and you know where Havilah is, near the border of Egypt as you go through Asher. And they lived in hostility toward all their brothers. Amazing, isn't it?
Kathleen, I mean, this is
Yes, ma'am.
not just the Jews, but the rest of Abraham's sons. Hostility towards all of them.
Yes. Hostility toward Isaac and his descendants. Hostility toward Keturah and her descendants. Keturah was his second wife, and I think she had 6 sons. And their descendants are listed. Their names are listed, but you never hear about them again. So, yes, toward all of them. Now, Scripture in chapter 37 calls Ishmael's descendants. When you read the Scriptures again and you refer to anything about Ishmael's descendants, you're going to find that they're called Ishmaelites, because ITE is put on the end of a lot of words. You asked me that one time, Jack. Why do we put ites on all these words? Because this is the name of the group of people named after their founder, Ishmael. Israelites, because they were founded by Israel, the son Jacob. And they're also called Midianites. We talked about Esau. Just the very next verses are about Esau. Esau's lineage was the Edomites, E-D-O-M, Edomites. But that's just another story. I just wanted to show that to you.
Okay, well, I don't have all these filled in a
Now where are we? What?
Well, C, D, and
Okay, let's look at number 2. Ishmael realized the divine promise that he would have how many sons? 12. And he would become a great nation. The Arabs consider what? Ishmael, the son of promise, not Isaac. Genesis 25 gives us the names of Ishmael's 12 sons and their tribes. They're listed. And it tells kind of where they live. Letter C, his line, Ishmael's line is given how many times? Once. Then God just sets them aside. We'll never hear about him again. Then set aside, and they are not mentioned anymore. Yeah, I needed to help you with that. So he mentions them one time, sets that list aside, and we never hear about it because God is telling us in this whole Bible, the whole Old Testament, is the history of the line of the Messiah, from where the Messiah comes. So when we understand that, it really makes the Bible a little bit more understandable why we have to go through all of what we go through to study it. Letter D, we do not follow Ishmael's line, his descendants, in the Scriptures, because he is not the chosen line. Leading to whom? Messiah. Okay. Do y'all think this is interesting? Letter E, Scripture calls the descendants of Ishmael what? Ishmaelites, and sometimes Midianites. Now, I think it's really important that we understand why this bitter rivalry that Ishmael had toward his brothers. I mean, he was discarded by his dad, wasn't he? God blessed him, protected him, but there was bitterness in his life. And so I say that Sarah never knew of the bitter fruit of rivalry, the bitter fruit of rivalry between Ishmael and Isaac. She didn't realize what her decision would result in when she had her husband sleep with her handmaid. From the beginning, Ishmael and his descendants lived in hostility with their brothers. And I think you really, really need to put that verse down so that you can remember it, because to tell people about the Arabs, it's really kind of nice to know the beginning of that bitterness, isn't it? And it's chapter 25, that one verse, they lived in hostility toward all their brothers. That's real important for us to be able to share with people and to understand it. To understand why it happened. It was the Ishmaelites, by the way. Yes, sir?
Also, I think it's important to remember that sometimes God tells us what He's going to do. Then we get tired of waiting and say, well, I'll take care of it.
We help God out? We do what?
We say, I'll take care of it. I can do this. God, I don't need your help. And it never turns out good.
No, it doesn't, does it? This turned out really bad, and we're still paying the price.
Eve, Abraham and Sarah, it's been bad.
Yeah, and we're still feeling the consequences of that 4,000 years later. 4,000 years this has been going on. The Ishmaelites were the ones, remember when Joseph was in the pit? His brothers threw him in the pit, and a caravan of traders came by. They were Ishmaelites. And he sold Joseph into slavery to Potiphar in Egypt. The Ishmaelites, the brothers, sold him to the Ishmaelites. And then 4,000 years later, just as Lyndon was saying, this rivalry and bitterness still survive in the Muslim religion. Who put that there? Okay, so that's letter number 3. Little did Sarah know that by her deeds the bitter fruit of rivalry was produced. And it didn't take long for it to take that root of bitterness to take root and to produce and flourish and have fruit, did it? Didn't take long. Ishmael and his descendants lived in hostility, and that's where you want to write chapter 25, verse 18. That's letter A. And then it was the Ishmaelites who sold, no, that's wrong. It wasn't the Ishmaelites Yes, it was. The brothers sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites. The Ishmaelites sold Joseph to the Egyptians. And we still see this fruit of rivalry today. Now let me just show you a few more things about Ishmael that we know. Questions? Okay. This little picture right here is a really good diagram of how you can show this to people. We have Abraham, Hagar, and Sarah. Hagar has Ishmael. Ishmael is the father of Islam. Abraham was married to Sarah. They had Isaac. David comes from the line of Isaac. And then it breaks off where we have Jesus in Christianity and Judaism. So here we have Abraham's descendants that are greater than the sands of the earth and greater than the stars in the sky. Where are the natural descendants of Abraham here? What two groups of people? The Islam's people, the Arab people, and the Jews. Who are the stars? The Christians are. That's right. We are the spiritual descendants of Abraham.
What happened to his second Keturah's children?
Well, you can read about that, and it tells their names and where they lived, their names of their tribes, and I'm not really sure where it is. I'd have to find it for you. But it gives their names one time and then sets them aside because they're not the promised line either. All right. Page 15, I want to show you this. It was at the burial of Abraham when he died that was the last time that Ishmael saw Isaac. They lived in hostility toward one another, but when Abraham died, they came back together to bury their father. This is chapter 25, verse 7. Abraham lived 175 years. Then Abraham breathed his last and died at a good old age. God told him he would do that, didn't he? He died at a good old age, an old man and full of years. I love that. And he was gathered to his people. Now here's what we need to remember. His sons, Isaac and Ishmael. Is this in your notebook or am I just reading it to you? Where is it?
His son, they buried him with him.
Okay. His sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave. And Abraham had bought a cave when his wife's, for a burial for him and his wife and family. It was the field that Abraham had bought from the Hittites. There Abraham was buried with his wife Sarah. And then we find that later that Ishmael died at the age of 137. I'm going to show you a picture. You can go to Israel today and see the tomb of Abraham still. They've been protecting it for 4,000 years. And it's been, it was a cave at the time. Now there's a huge church built over it. And has anybody seen it in Hebron? Okay. Anybody been to Israel yet? We'll all have to go. Okay. Let's see if I can. Okay, lights, guys, please. This is a Steve. This is a Rick Steves video. It's really good. Hebron, in Palestine. It's still controlled, I think, by Palestinians. We'll see here. All right, ready?
The ancient town of Hebron.
Real loud, honey.
200,000 people is the largest city.
Okay, I'm going to turn it off, and we'll go back because I really need you to hear that. What would I do without him? Ready?
The ancient town of Hebron, with over 200,000 people, is the largest city in the West Bank. And it's the bustling commercial capital with nearly a third of the entire West Bank economy. Just strolling the streets, dodging cars, and mixing with the people, I feel the energy of an economy that seems primed to grow. Commerce spills out everywhere. Exploring the market streets, I'm immersed in Palestinian life. Experiences like these are why we travel. Along with all the market activity and commerce comes high security and tension. That's because this city has the tomb of Abraham, so sacred to both Israelis and Palestinians. Here, Jews live literally atop Palestinian Muslims as the two communities struggle to be near Abraham's tomb. While the city is mostly Palestinian, a determined community of several hundred Israeli settlers have staked out the high ground living in a settlement above the market. The tension between the communities is illustrated by a wire net that protects the Arab food and clothing market below from the garbage of the Jewish residents above. Israeli troops are posted here to maintain control. Turnstiles and checkpoints are a way of life. A no man's land with Jewish political art decorating closed buildings divides the two communities. And it's all about this very sacred and complicated site. An ancient structure capped by a medieval church which now functions both as a mosque and a synagogue, holding the tombs of Abraham and his family. The focal point for both faiths is this, the tomb of Abraham. Poignantly, access for the feuding descendants of Abraham is divided by a pane of bulletproof glass. On one side of the glass, Jews worship in the synagogue, the second most holy place in Judaism. It's enlivened with singing, studying, and praying among the tombs of their great patriarchs. And the other half is a mosque, where Muslims worship before their shared patriarch with equal fervor. Its exquisite minbar, where the imam stands to give sermons, is a rare original from the 12th century, with inlaid wood and no nails. Unfortunately, this holy place's history has a tragic aura. For centuries, Jews were generally not allowed to worship here. Then, after the Israeli victory in the War of 1967, the space was shared by Jews and Muslims. But during a Muslim service in 1994, an Israeli settler entered here with his gun and killed 29 Palestinian worshippers. Since then, this holy space has been divided, emblematic of the difficult challenges that permeate the Holy Land.
It used to be, it's been a Christian church, and now it's a mosque and a synagogue. So it's very, very divided. Okay, let's see if I've done everything. I have. All right. So, we got done, didn't we? That's only because I didn't put any more pages in. I had 3 more pages to do. But I didn't. We'll do them next time they ask me to teach. Any questions about what we've done today? Are you enjoying learning about the patriarchs?
Yes.
Okay. Because it's really important for us to know it, isn't it?
Yeah.
All right. And so when we start again, we'll start with the birth of Isaac. We will